Unitarian Universalism is faith in people, hope for tomorrow's child, confidence in a continuity that spans all times. It looks not to a perfect heaven, but toward a good earth. It is respectful of the past, but not limited to it. It is trust in growing and conspiracy with change. It is spiritual responsibility for a moral tomorrow.
To Live Deliberately by Henry David Thoreau, Singing the Living Tradition, number 660. Why should we live in such a hurry and waste of life? We are determined to be starved before we are hungry. I wish to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life. I wish to learn what life has to teach, and not, when I come to die, discover that I have not lived. I do not wish to live what is not life. Living is so dear. Nor do I wish to practice resignation, unless it is quite necessary. I wish to live deep and suck out all the marrow of life. I want to cut a broad swath, to drive life into a corner and reduce it to its lowest terms. If it proves to be mean, then to get the whole and genuine meanness of it, and publish its meanness to the world. Or if it is sublime, to know it by experience, and to be able to give a true account of it.
Please recite with me our shared affirmation of mission. This fellowship is a welcoming, diverse, and nurturing beloved community that promotes progressive religious thought and practice to create a more loving, just, and sustainable world.
Listen more often to things than to beings. Listen more often to things than to beings. 'Tis the ancestor's breath when the fire's voice is heard. 'Tis the ancestor's breath in the voice of the water. Those who have died have never, never left. The dead are not under the earth. They are in the rustling trees. They are in the groaning woods. They are in the crying grass. They are in the moaning rocks. The dead are not under the earth. Listen more often to things than to beings. Listen more often to things than to beings. 'Tis the ancestor's breath when the fire's voice is heard. 'Tis the ancestor's breath in the voice of the water. Those who have died have never, never left. The dead have a pact with the living. They are in the woman's breast. They are in the wailing child. They are with us in our homes. They are with us in this crowd. The dead have a pact with the living. Listen more often to things than to beings. Listen more often to things than to beings. 'Tis the ancestor's breath when the fire's voice is heard. 'Tis the ancestor's breath in the voice of the water. Ah, ah, ah.
We call this light before us in hope that we may always remain a strong community, working together to make the world a better place.
This earth like pilgrims roam from birth to birth, and every time the choice is free to recognize ourselves and see. So many dead by rope and stake, we call them now to reawake, so that our lovers, friends, and kin may meet and greet and love again. Tonight we greet each waking soul and like a candle in a hole. So then, like birds on open hands, they stretch their wings and fly again. Whose pointed fingers turned us in, whose hands took money for our names, whose orders let the fires begin. Maybe they also live again, maybe reborn to walk among their burned or drowned or tortured ones, reborn to see the struggle cease and make amends and live in peace. And if our old foes walk again, we send them strength to break the chains and bend our powers towards His end, to make a healing, not revenge. November morning, dim and grey, peace between mortal and fae. A mist above the cauldron's rim, at Samhain when the veil is thin, at Samhain when the veil is thin, at Samhain when the veil is thin.
My sermon today is entitled, Taking It One World at a Time, a sermon across the thinning veil. Paul Casavel loves to drive his sports car fast, very fast, along the Seine River in Paris, through the Place de la Concorde, into the tight, crooked streets of Montmartre. Paul Casavel, citizen of Paris, architect, rogue, lover of Beaujolais wine and Gauloise cigarettes. I first met Paul in a talk by Dr. Kathleen Resnick entitled, "Because You've Never Died Before." And some of my observations are from Resnick's very fine lecture. No, Paul is not a patient from my days as a hospice chaplain. He is a wonderful creation in literature, sketched by the writer Francois Sagan in a thin novella entitled A Fleeting Sorrow. In it, we accompany Paul for one fateful day in early autumn. He learns in the morning from a doctor covering for his regular MD that he has terminal lung cancer with a 6-month life expectancy. Paul's day, as it is exquisitely described, takes us not only through the classic 5 stages of grief identified and named by Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, but also beyond those categories into the heart and soul of one man's denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. The book pulses with experiences many of us will recognize from work or life. Paul tells a friend who poo-poos the news. He skips work and eats a hefty 4-course meal with wine at a bistro where he's a regular. He races along the Seine and barely misses being crushed by an oncoming truck. And then he regrets his sharp reflexes because a quickie death might have saved him from some anticipated suffering. He buys drinks for everyone in a rundown bar in a part of Paris where he had been a stranger. He muses about an old love and frets over how to tell his ghastly news to both his wife and his mistress. This is France, after all, both of whom turn out to be nearly as narcissistic as the main character. He regrets the demise of his marriage to Mathilde, whom he tracks down in a centuries-old courtyard graced by a single tree. He grieves at the realization that he has never, ever owned a dog. When he cries, his tears are rife with anger and frustration and even self-disgust. He calls what's happening to him the opposite of life, of my life. He wonders if it's all a horrid mistake. He wonders how to live while he's dying. He asks himself whether there will be unbearable pain, whether there will be companionship and comfort. He even quotes Apollinaire to underscore how lonely he has become in the knowledge of his imminent demise. Now you walk through Paris, all alone, he speaks, among the maddening crowd, but still alone. The world of the dying is different from our world in so many ways, not the least of which is the sense of being alone, no matter how many companions, family members, hospice workers, saints, angels, or supreme beings may accompany us. Coping with terminal illness is hard work, and it creeps into every corner of a patient and family's life. And the dying person is often the forgotten griever. In tangible terms, often they have been moved into the central place in the home, a place with room for a hospital bed and other medical equipment, a welcoming space for visitors to congregate amidst the familiar sights and sounds and smells of that person's life story, the photos and the furniture and the bird feeder in the window and the fireplace and the TV set. The patient is dying in the living room, amongst the living and all the trappings of the non-dying. But then we could flip around that verbiage in my wordplay and argue that this person is also living in the dying room. Hospice can enable patients to live with dignity until they die, and ultimately to die well, free of pain, with grace and peace, however you might define that. In their book, Final Gifts, Maggie Callahan and Patricia Kelly note that a pending death in the family affects everyone and stirs up a jumble of emotions that may have been shaken loose by confronting human limitations and our inherent finitude. It stirs up so many questions, like, how can this be happening? Why me? Or why him or her or them? What is it like to die? Why has God abandoned us? How can I bear to be parted from my loved ones? Is it possible to find any peace or meaning in this event? One may ask, can I use the remaining time I have to grow personally, to share treasured moments of living and even mend some of what might be torn, while coping with many of the losses death will bring? How can I find my way through these dark and unfamiliar woods? Callahan and Kelly employ the term nearing death awareness to define that special grasp of reality that an actively dying person may possess. This unique and very individual awareness offers the chance for life review, spiritual healing, and in some case, even one last whirl at full immersion, deliberate living. We saw this play out in the well-publicized and heart-rending story of Brittany Maynard, the 29-year-old terminally ill newlywed who moved to Oregon explicitly to take advantage of the state's Death with Dignity Act, one of only 9 states in the United States with compassion and choices laws. You may know that Arizona has death with dignity legislation pending, and if this is important to you, please contact your representative. Brittany wept openly about her fate, yet she savored every moment she could, every day, with her husband and family. She scratched the Grand Canyon off her bucket list and posted radiant snapshots on Facebook. Originally, she had intended to end her own life compassionately and consciously on November 1st, 2014, but wanted to postpone that decision because, in her words, I still feel good enough, and I still have enough joy, and I still laugh and smile with my friends and my family enough. I feel alive. But ultimately, things changed, and Brittany did end her life that day as planned. I'd say Brittany is the embodiment of the rallying cry embedded in this quote from the Reverend Elizabeth Tarbox. Do not live too far in the past or in the future. Live now. Do not be afraid to die today, but expect life. Tarbox was moving through the journey of her own terminal cancer when she wrote those words. And a hospice patient will likely interpret them differently than you or me, perhaps, but the message is quite universal. We are all actively dying. It is built into this perishable equipment. We are freshness dated, whether we are 29, 49, or 79. And if we are not awake to life now, then when? Will we wait until we have a close call or a near-death experience or a positive COVID test, lose a loved one to this pandemic, or receive a fateful diagnosis like Paul Casavel to notice that we are alive? Stunned into awareness of the breath moving in and out of our lungs, our hearts beating in our chests, our eyes drinking in the beauty embedded in everyday things, in the red rock around us, our hands entwined with those we cherish. I wonder if Brittany Maynard had read Waldo by Henry David Thoreau. I think she would have related to his answer when asked what he thought the afterlife would be like. The sage of Concord responded, "I'm taking it one world at a time." How can we do otherwise? All we truly have is the here and now. The humanists of Idaho have written a freethinkers version of the famed Serenity Prayer, in which they offer this challenge: living one day at a time, experiencing one moment at a time, seeking wisdom through the human experience, learning all I can in the brief time that I am here, accepting setbacks as the building blocks of growth, and realizing that accepting the good and the bad are simply part of being alive. A prayer for our pandemic times, isn't it? I recently participated in an interfaith discussion of Albert Camus' The Plague, written in 1947 with eerie parallels to our current experience. And one of the conclusions of our group was that the residents of Oran in France, including the priest, come to realize that the disease is neither moral or amoral. It's part of the good and bad of being alive. What does matter is their responses to it. Some loot and profit, others rise to selfless heroism and find deep wells of empathy. As an absurdist, Camus was also expressing the idea that when you finally accept that you live in an absurd universe, or a random one, you make the most of every moment. But this is so uncomfortable, because we find ourselves right now pinned into this pandemic moment in time, and it's a moment we're not wanting to inhabit. Since March, time feels both compressed and elastic. There is no container as we typically experience it. Should we plan for a summer vacation in 2021? Will we be allowed back into the EU countries? When can we see our families and our friends? In micro terms, all we genuinely possess is the moment. Beyond the illusion of control, the past is gone, and the future is yet to be, and murkier than it typically might be. And that extra hour everybody but us Arizonans gained at midnight, well, East Coasters, enjoy the extra sleep, but it's not going to give you the ability to outrun mortality. Buddhism informs us here. Actively dying people have a rich opportunity to practice present moment living, to examine what has value for her, to confront his regrets, to see the world around them almost anew, to replace anger with acceptance. I know I feel more a sense of what actively dying might mean as we stare down this deadly disease still at large in our midst, and maybe you do too. Individuals who are in the state of near-death awareness report seeing loved ones through the thinning veil. There can be, often is, a softening of gruffness and a willingness to be vulnerable and repair relationships. Perhaps this moment in time is offering you that gift, whether you are healthy or not. In Sagan's novella, Paul notices the leaves falling by the Seine in a different way, the taste of the wine, the mustache of the waiter at his favorite bistro, even the way his hands look as he clutches the steering wheel. Many forces in Western culture have conditioned us to worship youthfulness and to be afraid of death and dying and aging. But there is another option, using our finitude as a spur to practice present moment living now. To go into your personal woods, to live simply but deliberately with expectation rather than dread, and to humbly allow the forest to find you in your joy and sorrow. To drink from a half-full glass, regardless of what's in it, water, wine, or Pepto-Bismol. To proceed with what the theologian Paul Tillich calls the courage to be in the face of our finitude, to push life out of the inner tombs of pain and disappointment and isolation and turn our face to the sun anyway. This topic has spurred a number of best-selling and moving personal accounts of nearing death in the past few years. Longer ago, the last lecture by CMU professor and UU, Randy Posh, Being Mortal by Atul Gawande, When Breath Becomes Air by neurosurgeon Paul Kalanithi, and The Unwinding of a Miracle by Julie Yip Williams. Death salons such as Death Cafe, The Conversation Project, and Death Over Dinner have flourished and become phenomena worldwide. People are ready to explore more honestly and socially about their mortality, and this is a positive development. For individuals who subscribe to doctrinal theologies of salvation and damnation, death remains a very scary gambit because they may believe that the afterlife holds eternal suffering or eternal peace for them, and that's a bit of a dice roll. In the 1700s, the anxiety about this was so intense that some Puritan believers ended their own lives in fear that they would not be saved upon death. It's an ironic and twisted logic, but sadly true. Well, we Unitarian Universalists shed these eschatologies a long, long time ago. We are a this worldly, here and now religion. Taking it one world at a time is embedded in our principles, our ethos, and our work, establishing a beachhead for justice and beloved community right here, right now, on the earth, among the living. Do not be afraid to die today, but expect life. That is our creed. Can you strive to embrace that expectancy beyond your fear and your own fleeting sorrow? The Rabbi Lawrence Kushner recalls a time for us when he confronted this question, a time when, as he put it, a tiger jumped out of the forest. He was scheduled for a CAT scan after having trouble holding his razor while shaving, and he writes, "Suddenly, everything I did was infused with meaning. I couldn't take anything for granted. The most trivial sensations became gifts. The smell of my children's hair, my wife's kiss, the cat purring, the morning coffee. Each was too precious to let go of." I relate to Kushner's experience, and perhaps you do too. Despite having gotten beyond the mystique of death, having been amidst it so often in my hospice work, I cannot deny the forethought of grief over the specter of leaving the continuum of my own life and my children's lives, and now my granddaughter's life. And the same holds true as we grieve those who have passed into the mystery. This can often be more than a fleeting sorrow. For Rabbi Kushner, though, that CAT scan turned up nothing. Idiopathic, the doctor said. I got a reprieve. Whoever pulled my file must have put it back in the life cabinet, he jokes. Then, in all seriousness, the rabbi asks, would that there be some way of getting to that heightened gratitude for life without the terror? Please find some quiet time and ask yourself that question. But I'm thinking now of Paul Casabel, the reckless, remorseful Parisian from our opening story. Are you curious what happened to him at the end of his earth-shattering day in a fleeting sorrow? Well, he receives a phone call from the doctor, who he has come to call Dr. Hamster. The doctor apologizes profusely for mixing up Paul's medical tests with another man who has a similar name. Paul doesn't have cancer after all. He is fit as a fiddle, healthy as the proverbial ox. Hope your day wasn't too awful. Really sorry, and all that. Paul is filled with such confusing emotions that all he can do is flee. He has never been so close to his feelings, more self-reflective, more vulnerable, or come to love the world more than he has during this fateful day. He packs off to a charming hotel on the Rue Fleury's, where he intends to stay for as long as he wishes or needs. The author, Francois Sagan writes, he felt his entire being slowly filling with something he knew was happiness, something triumphant and modest at the same time. Solitude was making him drunk. Paul has lived deliberately, if recklessly, on this one extraordinary day, and he will not go back to being lost in distractions. And although Sagan doesn't say this, I'd like to imagine that when Paul finally decides to go home, he'll get himself that dog. Blessed be, blessed we, and amen.
Now is the time for silent meditation. We join together today in a time of meditation. As we enter into the silence, we remember the many connections that sustain us in our religious community. In the silence now, we sit surrounded by these many connections, visible and invisible, that remind us every day that we are not alone. Now is a time for silent meditation.
We have been warmed by fires we did not build. We have drunk at wells we did not dig. In gratitude of our many blessings and many needs, this morning's offering for this community will now be received.
I Will Not Die an Unlived Life by Dawna Markova. I will not die an unlived life. I will not live in fear of falling or catching fire. I choose to inhabit my days, to allow my living to open me, to make me less afraid, more accessible, to loosen my heart until it becomes a wing, a torch, a promise. I choose to risk my significance, to live so that which came to me as seed goes to the next as blossom, and that which came to me as blossom goes on as fruit.
There's only us, there's only this. Forget, regret, or life is yours to miss. No other path, no other way, no day but today. There's only us, only tonight. We must let go to know what's right. No other road, no other way, no day but today. I can't control my destiny. I trust my soul. My only goal is just to be. There's only now, there's only here. Give in to love or live in fear. No other course, no other way, no day but today. There's only us, there's only this. Forget, regret, or life is yours to miss. No other road, no other way, no day but today. No day but today. No day but today. No day but
We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
Expect Life by Elizabeth Tarbox. Do not live too far in the past or the future.
Live now.
In each moment, expect a miracle. 10 kinds of birds at the feeder, and the tracks of a fox in the snow.
Pick up a magnifying glass and scrutinize that crocus. See the pollen at the center of the daffodil. Life's dust, death-defying life. Be astonished at the flower, arrested by its beauty. Run naked through the garden early in the morning and hope the wild geese fly by.
Get silly and laugh loudly with your grandchildren or your grandparents. Refuse to leave the dead behind, but bring their memory to all your chores and games and corners of quiet, warm tears. Know always that joy and sorrow are woven together. One cannot be without the other.
If you love, know that sometimes your love will bring you tears. If you grieve, know it is because at some time you were willing to love. Do not be afraid to die today,
But expect life